Boom. Ooh, 72% CPU consumption. Well, we will see if we can keep this up. Hit me up in the chat if it seems chuggy on your end of things. All right, so I was actually just laying in bed last night thinking about the first games that I shipped because the current game I'm working on, Aztez, is going to ship soon. We haven't announced our release window yet, but we will be announcing that soon and the release date a little bit after that. So I was just kind of reminiscing about the early days. So this is the first project I ever shipped as a professional game developer. It's a spelling word game called Beasley's Buzzwords, and it came out in, I think, 2003 or 2004. So the story on it was, and it's really bizarre, it's like back in this era of computers, this is way pre-Steam. The first third-party game on Steam was Ragdoll Kung Fu, and that happened way after Steam itself even launched to support Half-Life 2. And if you were just a couple of people wanting to make games, there really wasn't an idea that you could do it on your own. And then the casual market happened with studios like PopCap and a few other small people who were making small scope games with a small team and had a marketplace for it. So this is a spelling word game kind of targeted at that typical 35-year-old, casual gamer demographic. So first, let me show you the game as best I can. It's still available for download today. I don't think it runs on anything modern in terms of Windows 7 or beyond. And even selling the games, this is our copy of the game. We had our own wrapper for time trial, and then this would link. I think we used eCellerate, but there were a bunch of different payment processors back in the day. The idea that you'd have to roll your own stuff is pretty insane. The game runs at a crazy 640 by 480 resolution, and it's just a spelling word game. You spell words, and then if you spell enough words, you proceed to the next season, and if you spell enough words, it proceeds to the next year, and that's what resets the board. So, it's just a kind of a relaxing game, and you would spell like, tier. You can click to spell, and then you can kind of like go backwards on your words. And that's it. It's a little bit chunky here. This is actually a VM on macOS, so this is running on Windows XP VM. But yeah, let's proceed through a few seasons here. Drape. It's funny how quickly you lose the ability to quickly see letters. There's a feature in here where it'll actually suggest me a word in a second if I don't spell one. And then I'll blow your mind a little bit more in a second. You don't really want to spell anything, just a couple of words. Glam. Oh, yeah. And then these are just like score multipliers. That's really all there is in the game. Every year you rank up, and Beasley himself, kind of goes through janitor up to CEO. The game was fairly well scoring balanced. I had a bunch of bots actually play the game to figure out the kind of, like, it's at some point you have to spell, and I can tell you what the numbers were back when I was making the game, like an average of a 3.8 letter word or whatever to beat a year. But that is Beasley's Buzzwords itself. So the insane thing about Buzzwords relative to modern game development is that sometime before we started Flashbang to make Buzzwords and other games, Dan Tabar actually turned me on to a program called Virtools that he was using at JPL to do like weird NASA docking simulation stuff. And it's a game engine, but most of the meat of it is a visual scripting language that, as far as I remember, came out of like a robotics PhD, some kind of schematics-based system to program robots more easily, and then they kind of wrapped it. And it's actually a 3D engine, even though our first games were only 2D with it. So here's Beasley's Buzzwords in Virtools in a VM. This is kind of what I wanted to see if I could get up and running today. So I can play the game in here. And the idea of playing a game in an editor is, a lot like anything today, Unity or Unreal. It's a little bit chuggier. I think it runs. There we go. So this is the actual language. This is the spelling script. This is the scoring script. and you'll see that it found a word, bed, and even that word finding is done in the visual scripting language. And it's pretty crazy to anybody who came up as a code-based programmer. I came up with this. I didn't come up with it, but I mean, I came up with it as a developer. Like, this is my first heavy game development experience was with this system. So I mean, in terms of how it works, it's like these building blocks have behavior ins and behavior outs to activate them, and then to trigger a different activation on the output. And they have parameter ins and parameter outs, which is basically the inputs and outputs to the function. You can kind of think of it. So this is the spelling logic, and you can see that it's just, there's a mouse waiter here that's on, and it's just, when it gets the left mouse button down or up, it fires these things. And hex tile picker is this, which opens up into even crazier things, which is pixel to hex. And this is, some math that gets a row out of my hex grid settings, I guess, and then it's probably getting like the corner data, and then it sees if there's a row in the hex grid, equal to whatever this pixel to hex is, and if it is, it returns it, and it tries to get the attribute no select, so it's preventing selection for whatever reason, I forget. It's pretty bonkers. So if you actually keep it open with trace mode on, which will make the active things red, I can actually spell stuff out, and you can kind of see my logic flickering. And you can set breakpoints and things on these behavior links. So it's pretty bizarre. I even had a bunch of auto hotkey scripts in place, because a very common thing when you're working with the schematic stuff is you want to take a parameter out, copy it, and then paste it as a shortcut somewhere else in script, and then hit space on it twice to open it up. I guess I can't do that while I'm running. Into either its value, its name, or its name and its value, and then this is how you kind of link. But there's actually no even. I guess there is go to shortcut source, but I had auto hotkey scripts in place, so I wouldn't have to Control C, Control V on it at all. I would just I think I had ASDF home row key stuff set up. So this is kind of how I learned to program. It's a bizarre system. The other really insane thing about Virtools is that unless you set what they called initial conditions on an object, when an object was moved or changed during kind of play mode, you can think of it in the Unity terms, it wouldn't reset. It would just end up where it was. So you would have to stop, and then this is like the reset initial conditions, and if you go to their level manager, which is sort of the project view, the other weird thing is there is no project here. I've opened up a single file, and that's what you're editing. There's no loose files anywhere. So if you import a material or a mesh into this file, it just lives somewhere in this file. So you'll see that initial conditions are set on literally almost every object, so that when you kind of stop, it goes back to the way it was, which is really insane. That it's not the default to reset something, but the default to have it be continuous. So many bugs and frustrations during development. But this game, we started it with a 4-person company. I convinced a couple of college friends to move to Phoenix, Arizona. And I think April was when they moved in, and we launched this, I believe, in September. That's pretty fast turnaround. I mean, it's a simple game, but 5 months, bunch of 23-year-olds, I think we were. But you basically have scripts. Some scripts live globally, and some scripts live on an object. So if a script lives on an object and you duplicate that object, this is how you would do enemy AI stuff. Let me see if I can give you an example of a really simple script. Even the scoring one here is just, there's this set honeypot level, which is changing the fill on this. So the other crazy thing about the schematic stuff is when a parameter in is requesting its value, like when this is triggered, and this is setting the position Y, it's actually going to pull a value kind of upwards. So this is when it would actually do this math, which is adding together, this and this and this, and I'm passing in, I guess, the desired percentage, I suppose. And then if you like pass a vector into a float, it'll automatically convert it. And then at that point, it'll ask you, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to get its X, its Y, or its Z? It's really, really, really bizarre. This is kind of how you would, an easy way to have something fire every frame is just link it back with a frame delay of 1. But yeah, at some point in Virtools, they actually did add a scripting language, which is what the string to uppercase is. But I would use this scripting language basically to do operations that weren't exposed to the visual scripting system. I think there's very little. I guess the pixel to hex logic ended up being done here, but like this is all of the code that exists in Beasley's buzzwords. Very, very strange. And yeah, even let's see if I can actually find it. 12+ year projects. Somewhere in here, there's like a word hunt on the board. Submit hint check. Where I am checking for valid words on the board so I can trigger a game over. Word find and hint. Clean up? No. Don't clean it up. So this was a faster way to verify if the game was over sooner. Is basically, go through every word on the board, and if it has a vowel, then don't do anything. But if it doesn't have a vowel, set dead vowels to to false. And then once we've iterated everything, if dead vowels is false, then trigger game over, because if you can't spell a word without a vowel. But then, yeah, it's like this loops over, I think this is, just active tiles as a starting point. And I think I just did a manual recursive neighbor plot trying to find all the 3-letter words. Oh boy. Yeah, this is how I iterated over hex neighbors. This is a very common thing to do, is to do a sequencer. So every time you hit it with an input, it would activate the first time through this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then the last one you would typically kind of go onwards with your logic. Oh boy. Oh boy. The other really insane thing is, even though I'm using this dictionary find object again and again and again, there's no way to centralize it. If I actually found a bug in this and needed to change it, you would have to go find all the instances of it and like manually copy and paste in a new one, which is a bit insane. But yeah, that's buzzwords. We made other Virtools games, which I'll show in a second. Although it took me a while to get buzzwords running in Virtools because you have to manually link up your paths, which is really, really annoying. But yeah, in the building blocks, these are all the like built-in ones. So the 3D transformations if you want to like move along a curve, or camera logic. We did do a couple of our own, mostly for copy protection reasons. And this was with C++ and compiling your own building blocks. And there, Virtools had a very weak community, so there were a couple of additional building blocks people were making, but really not. And I think they actually did have Xbox 360 support at some point and released a handful. But yeah, other games we made with Virtools. We never shipped, but so we actually shipped Glowworm, which is our follow-up game, and Glowworm did okay. I mean, none of these games did well. They made like $30,000, but when you're young, that seemed like maybe a possibility was there. But we did do Potion Motion, which we canceled, but I think this might be the juiciest game I've ever worked on. So I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to run this damn thing. Is this going to work? Is a good question. Oh, mouse is weird. Mouse is very weird. Sure. So Potion Motion was a match 3 game. I don't think there's any sound here. Huh. But rather than swap, we just rotated groups of 4. But I think to this day, this might be the juiciest game that I've ever worked on. We just juiced the holy shit out of it for so long, so continuously. And we even did a bunch of meta juice. I was tracking. I had the ability in code, the visual stuff, basically, to trigger a combo, so I could decide what things were spawning in and force, a combo on someone. And we actually had to get like a kind of target graph in mind of not comboing constantly. We would suppress combos too, so we wouldn't spawn random things that would trigger a combo, and then we would kind of do combos every couple of moves. I mean, sometimes you couldn't control it, right? If you drop down something that would form a horizontal combo, but in terms of the new tiles that were spawning, we had total control over what was happening. But yeah, this is Potion Motion. We never shipped it. We burnt out on the idea that we would ever be successful in the casual market. And even if we were successful, then what would that mean? Making more casual games forever? It kind of made no sense to me. And I think we maybe did that all backwards. Like the idea was we have time and money and resources to spend 5 months in a game. Let's make a casual game and then make enough money to make the game that we really want to make. And I think the mistake is that if you have the time and money to make a game, you should just make the game you want to make, because I mean, chances are it's still not going to succeed financially anyway. So rather than have made a casual game that tanked so you can't make the game you want to make, you might as well have made the game that we wanted to make. And then if it tanked, it's like, well, we made the game that we wanted to make, right? Yeah, this is Potion Motion. We had a bunch of other power-ups that aren't in this build or something, and blockers that would spawn in that you could clear at the bombs. And this is like the thing that will. Oh yeah, and then we didn't require a match. You could just walk something over, which is really weird. But yeah, these would kill all the same color, and these would just. I think I have it slow down. Yeah, there we go. So if you want to see the individually staggered squash and stretch as columns come in. My God. Anyway, yeah, that's. I don't know how I'm gonna kill this because it's windowed. Yeah, that was Potion Motion. All the art there was Steve Swink on Potion Motion. Most of it, I would say like 95%. We carried it over from some earlier Flashbang people, so I think... Oh God. Hold on. But I think at that point, the build you were looking at just now, I think was like very close to 100% Steve artwork. We made a game. I think at this point I'm probably just yelling at the quietness of the internet. We made a game for Cartoon Network at one point based on the Sea. So this is Project Goldmaster, which was they were inspired by the Project Greenlight HBO special where they picked filmmakers, and we quote won this at an IGF where we were there with Glowworm, and it was supposed to be in partnership with Cartoon Network and AOL was trying to make more content, and they would like film episodes of us making the game and then broadcast it to the internet, and none of that happened. 0% of that happened. This project didn't actually start for almost a year until they felt bad about it, and maybe their lawyers were like, you are maybe obligated to do this. So they paid us, it's like $25,000 with a team of 4 for like 4 or 5 months, and that does not calculate, but we still did it because we really like C-Lab. We got to write scripts, and people, all of the actual voice actors recorded them, and we had to cut them up. They didn't do any of the work for us. But let me see if this works. The other crazy thing is we couldn't use any of their music, so we had to recreate all the music you hear here, which is a bit insane. I think there was maybe a version of this game that was actually fun. This one is not. This one is very tedious because they didn't like how short it was. So like every one of these rooms has just like wave after wave. But there's like 15 or 20 enemy types in the game. They're all physics-based. These are the simple ones, but later there's like joint-based ones. And again, this is all made with Virtools. Top-down shooter, 3 episodes, multiple characters. They all have little like VO and cutscenes, and then a bunch of mini games. But yeah, I think probably 0% of people ever played any amount of these. It feels weird to have made them. And fun fact, the content creators hated the show runners, the show creators of C-Lab really hated the exploitation of their products. There was a story that we were told when we visited, that the Aqua Teen Hunger Force creators were in a store, like a physical store, and they saw a Meat Wad plushie, and they're like, "What the fuck? There's plushies. We didn't even know about this." And to them, that wasn't a cool thing. That was them being exploited heavily by this corporate overlord that was Cartoon Network. So when we were there, they're actually about to have canceled C-Lab. At this point, it probably was canceled. It just wasn't announced to us as excellent people. But we had to go find them. The show creators are actually in-house at this point, despite the fact that they were originally external. And it was an interior closet with no windows. And our guide was actually like, we thought we stored stuff in here. And there were like 4 guys in there hunched over computers. And they're like, "Hey, these are the guys making the C-Lab game." And they just scowled at us. And we're like, "We're big fans." But we were too young. Anyway. I'm almost done rambling at the internet. This was not a very interactive session. But I don't know. It was good for my brain. And now I have this VM that I can just archive for all time. And then the death of Virtools for us was sort of the death of Flashbang version 1.0. Which was, I was working on not Cartoon Network, but Cisco contract work at this point. But we tried to pivot into our own. This is probably our first attempt at making a game that we would have wanted to make, but it was way too long. Just way too long. But we were taking the top-down shooter engine, and we were going to make it into our own shooter, but still targeted to the casual market, because again, at this time, there was no other place to sell games that you were making yourself. So we'd have to make it playable with one mouse button and super simple. I can show you that kind of looks like this. This is as far as this ever got. And it's going to be misaligned. So this is actually, you just roll the mouse kind of like a trackball, and then you can shoot. And if you hold down the mouse button, it does bring up a cursor to fire your like grenade weapon. And man, yeah, so Mike Kime was the artist on this, and he was free while I was, I think, finishing up like Gold Master part, like the C-Lab game, like launch deployment or something. I forget what the deal was, but he was way ahead of me in terms of available time. So there's actually like a whole game of content here, and the fact that there's like 30 or 40 screens and a bunch of different enemies, and all the enemies are like weird little physics rigs. Some are pretty simple, like these little bees are just sort of hovering physics rigid bodies, but some are more jointed, like this dude's tongue actually like is weirdly a real tongue. Let's see if I can actually beat this screen. But it was never very balanced, and it's this sort of death. Oh, there's a way to suck stuff up. What is it? I forget. Yeah, the theory is you're like a alien xenobiologist. Like, you're not killing these guys, you're putting them in your little capsule to like study them, or whatever the story was. I forget. But yeah, I can't hear sounds in here anymore. But I think you guys can probably hear the weird placeholder sounds we had for all this stuff. Oh my goodness, this guy is. Oh yeah, I forget. Oh yeah. I don't know what it wants me to do here. It wants me to vacuum them, but oops, that is a debug button. Oh boy. Huh. Oh, I have to collect them all. Oh my god. Matthew. This isn't fun. And I don't know how to turn off the debug button to see my sphere. Sorry about that. And then it's another wave? Wow. But yeah, there are a bunch of levels here. Anyway. Oh god, I'm gonna have to kill this through some other mechanism again. But yeah, that is a weird glimpse at game development with Virtools. So the very strangest thing about Virtools is that it still appears to exist in some incarnation. So the company was based out of Paris, and they never got big in the game industry, and they got bought up by Dassault, which is the company that makes SolidWorks, which is like a CAD modeling tool used by heavy industry and automobile makers and other people. And they bought Virtools to make it kind of an interactive game engine for their otherwise static content. But there's still like a weird 3D via thing on the DASO website, and it mentions like AR and VR, so I'm assuming it's up to date in some horrifying capacity. But yeah, that is basically, I just wanted to scratch a niche of like, can I actually open up these projects that I have not opened up in literally over a decade? And the answer is yes, I can, and they are kind of totally insane. And fun fact, I actually didn't learn how to program in an object-oriented way until we were doing Flash games for Cisco systems, educational training games for them. And I went out and bought the Colin Mook like Learn ActionScript 2 book and read it in 2 days. And that's when I was like, oh, this is how object-oriented programming works. Because before that, my only programming experience was Perl scripts and PHP stuff and like very different life cycles than objects. But yeah, if anyone's actually watching, feel free to hit me with any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to close this down and go about my lazy Sunday. But yeah, materials, 2D frames, relative positions you can set, stick left, all these anchor points. This is technology that's 14 years old, something like that. Pretty crazy ancient old. But yeah, it was probably pretty ahead of its time in terms of a unified environment. But they just couldn't. This is also in an era where licenses for this stuff was like $50,000 a game or $15,000 for a downloadable game, and I was doing deals with the company to make them tutorial content and things to get free licenses to actually ship our freaking games. Mr. Sid, no yelling. All right, well, I'm going to cut this off later, everybody.